Steph Curry finds an elderly woman searching for food in the trash, but his reaction wasn't anything like what you might imagine. What he did in that moment created a transformation that spread across the entire country in a way that nobody expected. This is a story that will completely change your perspective about making a difference in someone's life. The dense fog covered the streets of Oakland like a gray blanket, typical of that January dawn in the Bay Area. It was almost 2 o'clock in the morning when Steph Curry drove his Tesla Model S through the empty streets, returning from another intense training session at Chase Center. The fogged windshield reflected the yellowish lights from the streetlights, creating an almost cinematic atmosphere in the city that watched him grow up. Steph lowered the volume of the podcast he was listening to, a conversation about leadership and purpose, and let his mind wander. The season was being challenging. At 36 years old, each game seemed to carry the weight of expectations that went far beyond the courts. The media pressure, the constant comparisons with his own records, the responsibility of leading a new generation of players, all of this weighed heavily on his shoulders. He decided to take a different route home, passing through the neighborhoods where he used to play street ball as a teenager. It was his way of reconnecting with his roots, of remembering why he started playing basketball in the first place. The deserted streets told stories. Each corner brought memories of dreams being built on cracked asphalt courts. That's when his eyes caught something unusual. Near the Raley's Market on International Boulevard, a bent figure moved slowly among the dumpsters in the parking lot. Steph instinctively reduced his speed, trying to focus his vision through the fog. At first he thought it was a common homeless person. Oakland, like many California cities, faced a severe housing crisis. But something about that silhouette made him hesitate. The person was small, frail, moving with the caution of someone who didn't want to be seen. She wore a dark coat that seemed too big for her tiny body, and a wool beanie pulled over her head. Steph parked the car at a safe distance, turned off the engine, and stayed watching. The woman, because now he could see it was a lady, opened garbage bags carefully, as if looking for something specific. Her hands trembled, not just from the cold, but from age. Steph felt something contract in his chest. That wasn't the typical image of a homeless person. There was something different there, a silent dignity mixed with desperation. He knew he should simply keep going. He could call some charity organization the next day, make an anonymous donation. That's what most people would do. That's what his public relations team would probably recommend. But Steph was never one to take the easy path. He took a deep breath, opened the car door, and walked slowly toward the lady. The asphalt was still wet from the afternoon drizzle, and his sneakers made a soft noise with each step. The woman didn't notice him until he was just a few meters away. "Excuse me," said Steph, maintaining a respectful distance and speaking in a soft tone he had learned to use when he didn't want to be recognized. "Are you all right, ma'am?" The woman was startled, almost dropping the garbage bag she was holding. She turned quickly, and Steph could see her face for the first time. She was an African-American lady of about 75 years old, with tired but still bright eyes, and wrinkles that told stories of a lifetime of struggles and joys. Despite the situation, there was a dignity in her bearing that impressed him. I wasn't doing anything wrong," she said, with a voice that tried to sound firm but trembled slightly. "I was just looking for some cans to recycle." Steph knew that wasn't true. He could see the food packages she was discreetly hiding behind her back. But he decided not to confront her. Instead, he took a step back, showing that he didn't represent a threat. "Of course, no problem at all," he replied. "It's too cold to be on the street at this hour. My name is Steph. May I ask yours?" The lady studied him for a moment, her perceptive eyes evaluating his intentions. There was an intelligence there that contrasted with her current situation. "Dorothy," she said finally. "Dorothy Williams." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Williams. Look, I know this might seem strange, but there's a 24-hour cafe right around the corner. How about we get something warm? On me, of course." Dorothy hesitated. Steph could see the internal battle happening in her eyes. Pride fighting against necessity. Distrust against hope. He remained motionless, letting her make the decision. "You don't know me," she said slowly. "Why would you do this?" Steph smiled, a genuine smile that Dorothy felt was true. "Because my grandmother taught me that there's always time for a cup of coffee and good conversation. And because," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "because all of us need kindness sometimes." Dorothy observed him for another long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded her head. "All right," she said, "but just coffee, and I'll pay for mine." Steph knew better than to argue with a determined lady. "As you wish, Mrs. Williams. As you wish." As they walked the few meters to the cafe, Steph noticed how Dorothy kept her head high despite the circumstances. There was a strength in her that touched him deeply. He didn't know yet, but that casual encounter on a cold Oakland dawn would change not only Dorothy's life, but also his own understanding of what it really meant to make a difference in the world. The cafe bell rang softly when they entered, and the warm, aromatic air enveloped them like a welcoming embrace. It was time for two stranger souls to truly get to know each other. Mel's Diner on International Boulevard was one of those establishments that seemed to have stopped in time. Red vinyl booths, white formica counter, and a waitress named Rosa who had worked the dawn shift for more than 15 years. The fluorescent light gave a welcoming tone to the small but clean environment, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the aroma of bacon coming from the kitchen. Steph chose a corner table, away from the windows, instinctively seeking privacy. Dorothy sat carefully, removing her beanie and revealing gray hair combed with care, even in those circumstances. This small detail didn't go unnoticed by Steph. She cared about her appearance, maintained her dignity even while facing difficulties. Rosa approached with 2 menus and 2 cups, automatically filling them with steaming coffee. She cast a curious look at the unlikely duo, but her experience in the dawn shift taught her not to ask questions. "What will you have?" she asked, chewing gum. "Coffee is perfect for me," said Dorothy quickly. Steph observed her for a moment. "Rosa, can you bring 2 house specials? With everything, eggs, bacon, toast, pancakes, and more coffee, plenty of coffee." Dorothy began to protest, but Steph gently raised his hand. "Mrs. Williams, I ate just a few hours ago, so you'd be doing me a favor eating most of it. And honestly, after the training I had today, I need the company more than the food." Rosa wrote down the order and walked away, leaving them alone again. Dorothy stirred the coffee slowly, avoiding Steph's gaze. The silence extended for a few moments, not uncomfortable, but loaded with unspoken things. "You know who I am, don't you?" Steph finally asked. Dorothy raised her eyes and for the first time smiled. A smile that completely transformed her face, revealing a woman who must have once been very beautiful and still maintained a special glow. "Steph Curry," she said simply. "Basketball player. Very good, from what they say on TV. And even so, you agreed to have coffee with me?" "Young man," said Dorothy, her voice gaining strength. "At 75 years old, you learn that no matter how famous someone is, They're still just a person. And good people do good things, regardless of how many people know their names. Steph leaned slightly forward. Tell me about yourself, Mrs. Williams. About your family, your life. I want to truly know you. Dorothy hesitated again, but something in Steph's sincerity made her decide to open up. There's not much to tell. I was married for 45 years to a wonderful man named Robert. I worked as a nurse at Highland Hospital for 35 years. We had 2 children. James lives in Atlanta, works in IT, and Sarah is in Portland. She's a teacher. You must be proud of them. Very proud, she said, but her voice carried a note of sadness. Robert died 2 years ago. Diabetes. They were difficult months in the hospital before he passed. Steph remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. The medical bills were substantial. Insurance covered part, but not everything. And after he was gone, I discovered that our financial situation wasn't as good as I thought. His pension was reduced, mine from nursing isn't much, and the medications I take for arthritis and high blood pressure. She paused. Well, they're expensive. Rosa arrived with the plates, stacking them on the small table. The amount of food was generous, and Steph noticed how Dorothy's eyes involuntarily lit up at the sight of the meal. Eat, he said gently, while it's hot. Dorothy began eating slowly, but it was obvious she was hungry. Steph drank his coffee, giving her space and time. Your children don't know about the situation? He asked after a few minutes. Dorothy stopped eating and looked at him directly. James just bought a new house, has 2 small children. Sarah is paying student loans and trying to help her husband, who was laid off last year. They already have enough problems. But I'm sure they'd like to help. Of course they would, interrupted Dorothy, her voice carrying decades of maternal protection. And that's exactly why they can't know. I spent 45 years of my life protecting my family. I'm not going to stop now. Steph nodded, understanding. He himself knew the weight of family responsibility, the need to protect those we love. And you? Asked Dorothy, changing the focus. It must be difficult being so young and having so many people expecting so much from you? Steph was surprised by the direct question. Most people assumed that fame and money solved all problems. Sometimes it's isolating, he admitted. You never know if people like you for who you are or for what you represent. And the pressure. You always have to be perfect, always have to have the right answer, always have to win. And when you don't win? When I don't win, I feel like I'm disappointing not just myself, but millions of people who believe in me. Dorothy nodded slowly. I understand. When Robert was sick, I felt something similar. Like I had to be strong for him, for the children, for all the other patients I cared for. I couldn't let anyone see that I was falling apart inside. They looked at each other across the table. 2 human beings from completely different worlds, but connected by something deeply universal. The loneliness that comes with the weight of responsibility and the struggle to maintain dignity in the face of adversity. You know, said Steph, my grandmother used to say that God puts people in our path exactly when we need them. She said, there are no chance encounters. Dorothy smiled again, that transformative smile. Your grandmother seems to have been a wise woman. She was. And I have the feeling that you are too. They continued talking while Dorothy finished the meal. She told stories of her years as a nurse, of the lives she touched, of the families she helped during moments of crisis. Steph shared his childhood memories from Charlotte, of the dreams he had when he started playing basketball, of the importance of family in his life. When Rosa came with the bill, it was almost 4 in the morning. Steph paid discreetly, including a generous tip. As they prepared to leave, Dorothy gently touched his arm. "Steph," she said, "thank you. Not just for the food, but for the conversation. It's been a while since I felt seen, understood." "The pleasure was all mine, Mrs. Williams. Can I call you? I'd like to continue our conversation." Dorothy hesitated for a moment, then wrote her number on a napkin. "I live on Elm Street, near Lake Merritt. Small house, blue, with a white fence that needs new paint." Steph carefully kept the napkin in his pocket. "I will call. I promise." When they left the cafe, the fog had dissipated slightly, and the first lights of dawn were beginning to tinge the sky with pink tones. Steph offered a ride, but Dorothy politely declined, saying she liked to walk and that her house wasn't far. As he watched her slowly walk away down the sidewalk, Steph felt something changing inside him. That conversation had touched a part of his soul he didn't know needed care. Dorothy hadn't seen him as Steph Curry, the basketball star. She saw him as Steph, the young man who needed someone to talk to on a lonely dawn. And he saw her as much more than a lady in difficulties. He saw a strong, intelligent woman full of stories and wisdom who deserved much more than searching for food in dumpsters. In that moment, Steph made a decision that would change both their lives forever. 3 days passed since the encounter at the cafe, and Steph couldn't get Dorothy out of his thoughts. During training, between rehearsed plays and three-point shots, his mind returned to the image of that dignified lady searching for food in dumpsters. He had promised to call, but wanted to do more than just a courtesy call. On Thursday morning, after a victory against the Portland Trail Blazers, Steph decided to act. He called Marcus Thompson, a local journalist he knew well and who had sources in various social organizations in Oakland. "Marcus, I need a favor, and this stays between us." "Sure, Steph. What do you need?" "I want information about social services for the elderly in Oakland, specifically about a lady named Dorothy Williams who lives on Elm Street near Lake Merritt." Marcus was intrigued, but had known Steph for years and knew that if he was asking, there was a good reason. "I'll see what I can find out discreetly. Can I ask why?" "Someone who needs help, but not the kind that solves everything with money. You understand?" "I understand perfectly. I'll get back to you today." While he waited, Steph decided to drive by Elm Street. He found the house easily, small, faded blue, with a white fence that really needed painting, but impeccably cared for. There was a small garden in front with roses that, even in winter, showed signs of loving care. It was the type of house that told a story of a lifetime of work and dedication. He didn't knock on the door. Instead, he parked across the street and observed. Dorothy came out around 2 in the afternoon, wearing a clean but mended coat, carrying a shopping bag. Steph followed her discreetly to the local market, maintaining enough distance not to be noticed. At the market, he observed Dorothy examining prices carefully, picking up basic items: bread, milk, some soup, cans. In the medicine section, she spent long minutes comparing prices of over-the-counter medications, clearly calculating every cent. Steph felt his heart tighten when he saw her return a bottle of vitamins to the counter after checking the price. Marcus called that afternoon with information that confirmed his suspicions. Dorothy was registered in some assistance programs for the elderly, but there were enormous waiting lists. She received limited food stamps and was entitled to some subsidized medical services, but the gaps were significant. More importantly, Marcus discovered there were dozens of other elderly people in the region in similar situations. "It's a bigger problem than I imagined, Steph," said Marcus. "Oakland's gentrification pushed many low-income elderly into impossible situations. They have houses they inherited or bought decades ago, so technically they're not homeless, but they don't have money for basic necessities." That night, Steph talked extensively with Isha about the situation. They were in the kitchen of their house in Atherton, the children already asleep, and Steph told the whole story of the encounter with Dorothy. "I want to help," he said, "but I don't want to just write a check. That wouldn't solve the real problem, and knowing Dorothy, she probably wouldn't accept direct charity even if I offered." Isha, who always had a generous heart and a practical mind, asked the right question. What she needs isn't just money, it's dignity and purpose, right? Exactly. Then let's create opportunities for her to earn what she needs, not just receive it. In the following days, Steph and Isha developed a plan. They talked to the owner of the market where Dorothy shopped, an Italian immigrant named Tony Ricci, who had managed the family establishment for 30 years. Tony knew Dorothy as a polite and punctual customer, and was moved to learn of her situation. "We always need help with small tasks," said Tony. "Organizing stock, helping newer customers find products, keeping the area clean. If she's interested, I can create some part-time shifts." But Steph wanted to go beyond. He contacted other local merchants, the pharmacy, the laundromat, a small community library. Slowly, he began weaving a network of small but dignified opportunities for Dorothy and, potentially, other elderly people in similar situations. The most delicate part was approaching Dorothy without hurting her pride. Steph waited a week before calling, enough time to establish the foundations of his plan. "Mrs. Williams, this is Steph. How have you been?" "Well, dear. And you? I saw you won the game against the Lakers yesterday." Steph smiled. Dorothy was following his games. "Thank you. Look, I'm calling because I need advice. You have experience with healthcare, right?" 35 years as a nurse. Why?" "A friend of mine is trying to organize some community services for the elderly in Oakland, and he needs someone with experience to consult about the real needs of the community. It would be consulting work, a few hours per week, well paid. I thought of you immediately." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Steph could almost hear Dorothy thinking. "Steph," she said slowly, "this friend of yours isn't by chance a polite way of you trying to help me?" Steph laughed. "Mrs. Williams, you're smarter than I imagined, but I swear the offer is real. We really need someone with your experience, and it really would be legitimate work." "And I could really help other people?" "Absolutely. In fact, you'd be essential." Dorothy considered for a long moment. "All right, but with one condition. I want to meet this friend of yours personally before accepting anything." Steph smiled. She was testing his sincerity, and he completely respected that. "Of course. How about we meet at the same cafe from last week? Tomorrow, 2 in the afternoon." "Perfect." The next day, Steph arrived at Mel's Diner accompanied by a middle-aged African-American woman named Janet Harris, who actually coordinated social services for the elderly in the region. She had agreed to participate in the plan after Steph explained the situation and offered funding to expand her existing programs. Dorothy arrived punctually, wearing a simple but elegant dress and carrying an old but well-cared-for briefcase. She greeted Steph with a warm hug, then turned to Janet with professional posture. "Mrs. Williams," said Janet, "Steph told me about your experience as a nurse. We really need someone with your background to help us develop more effective programs for elderly people in our community. During the next hour, Dorothy asked intelligent questions and offered valuable insights about the real needs of Oakland's elderly. Steph watched with admiration as she transformed from a vulnerable lady into a competent and experienced professional. This was the real Dorothy Williams, intelligent, capable, full of knowledge and experience. When Janet officially offered the consulting position, with a salary that would comfortably cover Dorothy's basic needs, she accepted with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, looking directly at Steph, "for seeing me as more than just someone who needs help, for giving me the chance to help others." But Steph's plan was just beginning. In the following weeks, he worked discreetly to create an entire support network. Dorothy became the informal coordinator of a group of elderly people who met weekly at the community library. They shared resources, supported each other mutually, and gradually began developing creative solutions for common problems. The program grew organically. Tony Ricci hired 3 other elderly people for part-time jobs in his store. The local pharmacy created a discount program for medications. The library established special hours for elderly activities. Steph visited Dorothy regularly, always under the pretext of discussing the program, but in reality, because he genuinely appreciated her company and wisdom. Isha and the children also began visiting her, and Dorothy became a substitute grandmother figure in their lives. 1 month after the program began, Steph received a call from Dorothy. "Steph, I need to tell you something important." "Of course, Mrs. Williams. What is it?" "My children called. They heard about the program through a friend who saw a report in the local newspaper. They want to come visit me next weekend." Steph smiled. "That's wonderful. How do you feel?" "For the first time in 2 years," said Dorothy, her voice choked with emotion, "I feel like I have something positive to tell them. I'm not just the widowed mother they need to worry about. I'm someone who's making a difference again." In that moment, Steph knew his plan had worked better than expected. He hadn't just helped Dorothy. He had helped her help herself, and in the process, created something that was benefiting the entire community. 3 months after the first encounter on that cold dawn, Steph was on the improvised stage of Oakland's community center, looking at a crowd of about 200 people gathered for the official launch of the Oakland Elders Network. The name had been Dorothy's suggestion, who was sitting in the front row with a radiant smile that Steph would never forget. Her transformation was remarkable. The gray hair was styled in a modern fashion. She wore a navy blue blazer that Isha had helped her choose, and her eyes shone with a vitality that wasn't present that first night. But more important than the physical change was the change in her posture. She sat upright, confident, like someone who knew she had value and purpose. 3 months ago, began Steph, his voice echoing through the packed hall, I learned a lesson that changed my perspective on what it really means to make a difference. I learned from an extraordinary woman that the true need isn't just for material resources, but for dignity, purpose, and community. In the audience were not only elderly people who had benefited from the program, but also their families, local merchants, volunteers, and local media representatives who had discovered the story through community conversations. Janet Harris took the stage to present the numbers. In 3 months, the Oakland Elders Network had connected 47 elderly people to part-time work opportunities, created a talent bank where retirees offered tutoring and consulting, established a companionship program that drastically reduced loneliness among participants, and developed a mutual support network that was expanding beyond original expectations. "But the numbers don't tell the complete story," said Janet. "I'd like to invite some people to share their experiences." Dorothy was the first to speak. She approached the microphone with the confidence of someone who had spent decades caring for others and found her way back to that purpose. "A few months ago, I was lost," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I lost my husband, was struggling financially, and felt invisible. Worse still, I felt like I had nothing more to offer the world." She paused, looking directly at Steph. "Then a kind young man showed me I was wrong. He didn't see me as a problem to be solved, but as a person with value and experience to share." She told about her work consulting for community health programs, about how she was helping other elderly people navigate support systems, and about how she had reconnected with her children in a stronger way than before. "My children came to visit me last month," continued Dorothy, "and for the first time since I lost Robert, they didn't worry about me. Instead, they were proud of me, proud of the work I'm doing, of the people I'm helping. That's priceless." Other elderly people followed, each telling their transformation story. Harold, 68 years old, former math teacher who now tutored high school students 3 times a week. Maria, 72 years old, retired seamstress who created a craft circle that not only generated extra income, but built deep friendships. Robert Jr., 80 years old, Vietnam veteran who found purpose mentoring young ex-military in transition to civilian life. Tony Ricci took the stage to talk about the impact on local businesses. "These elderly people aren't just employees," he said. "They're the soul of our establishments. Customers come not just to buy, but to talk with Harold about old Oakland stories, or to ask Maria for gardening advice. They created a community where before there were only commercial transactions." When it was Steph's turn to speak again, he was visibly emotional. "When I was a child, my father always told me that success isn't measured only by what you achieve, but by what you leave behind," he said. "For years, I thought that meant sports records or trophies. But Dorothy and all of you taught me that true legacy is the lives we touch and the communities we strengthen." Steph paused, looking at Dorothy, who had tears in her eyes. This program started with a casual encounter on a cold dawn, but it became something much bigger. It became proof that when we truly see each other, not as problems or statistics, but as human beings with inherent value, we can create changes that spread far beyond what we imagine. The audience stood in warm applause, but the night's surprise was yet to come. Isha took the stage carrying a large envelope. "Steph and I wanted to announce that the Oakland Elders Network received a substantial donation that will allow expansion to other Bay Area cities," she said. "But more important than that, we received a call this week that changed everything." She opened the envelope and took out an official letter. "Your story reached the ears of several national foundations and philanthropic organizations. The AARP Foundation wants to use Oakland as a pilot model for a national program. They're offering resources to take the Oakland Elders Network to 50 American cities in the next 2 years." The hall exploded in applause and shouts of joy. Dorothy raised her hands to the sky, too emotional to speak. Steph came down from the stage and hugged her, both crying openly. "Mrs. Williams," he whispered in her ear, "you saved many more people than you imagine." "No, dear," she replied, holding his face with her hands. "We saved each other." The following weeks brought media attention that Steph hadn't anticipated. The story spread organically through social networks, not because of a marketing campaign, but because it touched something fundamental in the American soul: the need to see and value the elderly, to create real communities in an increasingly isolated world. Journalists from across the country came to Oakland to document the program. What most impressed reporters weren't just the numbers or economic impact, but the visible transformation in the people involved. Dorothy appeared on national television programs, always insisting that Steph share the stage with her. "This isn't the story of a celebrity helping a needy person," she said in an interview on Good Morning America. "This is the story of how two human beings connected and created something bigger than themselves. Steph didn't save me. We saved each other. And in the process, we learned how to save an entire community." The national expansion brought challenges and opportunities. Steph established the Curry Family Foundation as the program's official arm, with Dorothy as Director of Community Development, a title she carried with immense pride. She traveled to other cities, training local coordinators, sharing lessons learned in Oakland, always reminding everyone that the program worked because it treated elderly people as valuable resources, not burdens. 6 months after that first night, Steph and Dorothy were sitting in the same cafe where it all began. It was a monthly tradition they had established. A quiet dinner to talk about life, the program, and plans for the future. "You know what impresses me most about all this?" said Dorothy, stirring her coffee the same way she had done that first night. "What?" "How something that started with so much pain and shame transformed into so much joy and purpose. That night, I was searching for food in the trash. Today, I'm helping to feed entire communities with hope." Steph nodded, reflecting on his own journey. "You know that night changed my life as much as yours, don't you?" "How so?" "Before meeting you, I was struggling with what it meant to be successful. I felt like I was playing basketball just to meet expectations, losing connection with why I started playing in the first place. You reminded me that true success isn't about being perfect or winning every game. It's about using your platform to make a real difference in people's lives." Dorothy smiled. "And you reminded me that no matter what age we are, we always have something valuable to offer. That our experience, our wisdom, our care, all of that still matters." They remained silent for a moment, each lost in their own reflections. Then Dorothy pulled an envelope from her purse. "I received this today. A letter from a 73-year-old lady in Detroit. The program arrived there last month, and she wanted to thank me. She said that for the first time in years, she feels needed again." Steph read the letter, smiling as he saw how words of gratitude similar to those Dorothy had expressed months ago now echoed across the country. 47 cities now, he said. More than 2,000 elderly people connected to work opportunities and community. And it all started with you being brave enough to accept coffee with a stranger on a cold dawn. "And you being kind enough to offer it," replied Dorothy. As they prepared to leave, Dorothy touched Steph's arm once more, as she had done that first night. "Steph, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course." "That first night, when you stopped the car and came to talk to me, I knew immediately that you were different. Not because you were famous, but because you looked me in the eyes, really saw me. It had been a long time since anyone did that." Steph felt tears forming in his eyes. "And you saw me too, Mrs. Williams. Saw beyond the fame, beyond expectations. Saw just Steph, a young man who needed to remember what really mattered in life." They hugged at the cafe door, two unlikely friends united by a moment of human connection that transformed into something much bigger than either could have imagined. As they walked to their cars, Steph looked back one last time at the small cafe that had become a sacred place in his memory. A small sign beside the door caught his attention. Something he had never noticed before. every encounter is an opportunity for kindness. He smiled, knowing that Dorothy had probably seen that sign the first night and chosen to trust him because of it. Or maybe it was just coincidence. Either way, it didn't matter. What mattered was that two strangers had chosen to truly see each other on a cold dawn, and that simple choice had created waves of transformation that would continue to spread for generations. As he drove home, Steph thought about the thousands of elderly people who now had purpose and dignity because of that night. He thought about the communities being strengthened, the families reconnecting, the lives being transformed. But more than anything, he thought about Dorothy Williams, the extraordinary woman who taught him that true success isn't measured by the trophies we win, but by the lives we touch and the differences we make when we choose to see each other's humanity. That night, as he fell asleep, Steph smiled, knowing he had found his true legacy. And somewhere on the other side of the city, Dorothy Williams was doing the same thing, grateful for a kind young man who stopped his car on a cold dawn and changed the course of her life forever. Their story had become bigger than both of them. It had become a powerful reminder that true magic happens when we stop seeing problems and start seeing people. When we choose connection over convenience, compassion over indifference. And perhaps, most important of all, when we remember that all of us, regardless of our age, status, or circumstances, have something valuable to offer the world, if only someone is kind enough to give us the opportunity to shine.